All right, before we get into the programming of PHP, I want to give you an overview of what client-server type processing is about. All right, so far in web programming, you learned how to write web pages that were dynamic in that they responded to user clicks, they changed color, they displayed error messages, they displayed totals, did those kind of things. And we also learned how to submit a form to a server, but it was sent to my server that simply echoed what you sent it for the most part. Right? So in that type of model where there's no data component and all the processing is done on the client, the laptop here is considered the client. The client sends an HTTP request. I want this page to the server. Or in our case, most times it was right there on your desktop. The nice thing about HTTP requests is they can display and you can process web pages right on your desktop. So this request may not be going to a web server necessarily. It might just be going to a local file. That's the other nice thing about developing web applications that are not data-based is you can put those web pages on somebody's computer and they can run through those pages like we did. The server or whoever sends that page back, and then your browser renders what it gets. The browser executes any JavaScript that is inside there. The browser does that all. So the downside to this is that the page, once it's sent, is pretty fixed. Okay? And that isn't going to change. This server has the HTML stored on it. In our case, it was your flash drive or desktop or wherever you were working. But what we didn't have here was the ability to store data from one session to another. There are multiple ways to do that. One way is to use cookies, but a lot of people frown upon cookies, and if you have lots and lots of data, like my books read database has got 700-800 books in it, that's a pretty big cookie. A better solution is to add a database server to the equation. So now we're doing client-server type processing where we have a client and then a server. Most web servers have a database server that's either embedded in them or they're linked to it. So this is my database server. It has a database on it. And this is a web server. And the web server's job is to receive HTTP requests just like before and send HTML pages back just like before. But what's different is that this server, using support from the database, dynamically creates the page. When we go to my homepage, all of a sudden it's programming logic intermediate, web data management instead of programming logic beginning and web programming. I didn't touch the web page at all. All I did was went to the database and said, I'm not teaching this class, I'm not teaching that class, I am teaching that class, I am teaching that class. And the next time I opened up the page, it displayed current courses over here and other courses over there, and it flipped everybody around to where they needed to be. Because this page is dependent on my database. So now when we send an HTTP request, first of all, it's a little different because it's not an HTML page anymore. It's probably, in our case, it's going to be a PHP page. It might be an ASP page, which means the extension is different. You cannot run PHP that's embedded inside an HTML page. In order to have processing, server-side processing embedded in a page, it has to have the PHP extension or the ASPX extension if you're using Microsoft's ASP. It's a different language. I'm not sure what the extension is for Perl or any of those others. Those are the two that I know. Go ahead.
Is ASP similar to what we're learning?
The concepts are the same, but it's more similar to Visual Basic C# than it is PHP.
Okay. I've just seen a lot of job postings out there where they're looking for ASP.NET.
You've done it's one of these where you have to be able to imagine yourself very quickly learning how to apply what you know about C#, because you use Visual Studio to create ASP pages. How do you apply what you've learned about C# and what you know about client-server processing and where the processing is done versus and how the pages are rendered? You tie those things together, and I would put my name in the hat. The other alternative is, if you're uncomfortable with putting your name in the hat for that, and I'm sorry, put your name in the hat, and if you get an interview, go in very confident that you could quickly learn, apply the skills that you have to it. It's a different language, but it's not, because it's .NET and it's built in Visual Studio. And so it should be a pretty quick trip for you to update your skills. But if you're not comfortable with that, then find an ASP book. I'm pretty sure Murak has one. ASP book, leaf through it and go, oh, yes, I see, okay. And then you'll be ready to go. Or if somebody wants somebody with Perl experience, same kind of stuff. If you're not sure, and this is something you're going to find out in the next class, if you're not sure, worst you can do is not get an interview and they'll go, no thanks. Okay, so now what happens is we send a PHP page. I'm going to limit it to this class now. We send a PHP page that has embedded in it, or a request for a PHP page. The server goes out and gets that PHP page. Embedded inside the PHP page is HTML, JavaScript, potentially CSS if you don't have it external. You can still link to JavaScript files. All of that stuff still applies. HTML pages can't have PHP embedded in them, but PHP pages can have everything embedded in them. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, links to those, and links to other PHP pages, and we'll see all of that this semester. So this PHP page comes up here, and embedded in it is code. That code gets executed, and the code executed may include an SQL command that gets sent to the server. The server sends back the query results, and those query results are then processed by the PHP to be plugged into the web page. So when you go to my homepage, what really happens is you get a request for my courses.php page. Notice the PHP extension. You send a request for that page. That page says, I need a list of his current courses, his other courses, and his not his archive courses, because that's a separate link. I need a list. So it goes to the database and it gets that list using an SQL command. Probably says, give me the course name, give me the course number, and whether it's active for all courses that are not archived. I have little flags in my database. I said, this is an archived course. This is an active course. It gets that data and it builds basically HTML. If you view the source for this page, it looks like an HTML page. There's nothing in there that looks like it's just cells and tables, and here's programming logic intermediate. I thought you said it was PHP. It is. This was created by PHP. What PHP does is it creates, most often, HTML. It can be used, and this gets really mind-boggling, to create JavaScript. So the JavaScript of your page can be changes based on the day of the week, based on the semester, based on the contents of the database. You can change your JavaScript. In web programming, we learned how to set constants to say, here's the mins and the maxes and stuff. We could stuff those into a database and say, what's the minimum value for this and the maximum value for that? Stuff them in a database and pull them out. And then have JavaScript that validates around those values instead of constants that we type manually into the code. So what's a little disconcerting is that this is what the view user sees, and if they right-click, they get HTML. But that's not what created this page. Same thing with the attendance tracker. If we look at the raw source of this, and I think we'll look at it in a little while, we'll see some of the PHP in there. It looks nothing like this. I don't know why I got Java. There it is. Notice this has some JavaScript in it. Okay. But here's the options that are inside my combo box. That's filled from the database. What are the available semesters to fill my combo box? So these list of options that are in my combo box were created by PHP based on the data it extracted out of the database. And then come all your names. And my courses for this day, I made this smart enough to say which classes meet on this day. If it doesn't meet on this day, don't even put it in the combo box. And then date picker, that's a special one that I created, so let's not look at that one too much. And then for each student, there's the name, there's the ID number, there's Neil's name, was he absent, was he present, there's all the choices, everything. Where'd Neil's name come from? Database. These options in this combo box are fixed, but ultimately they get stored in the database. This is a two-way system. Okay. When we send a form to the database, that's also a PHP page. From a PHP page. Actually, no, it's not. Take that back. It's just a form. So when I mark Neil as present for today, that gets sent as part of a form to the server. And the server accepts it. And on the other end, there's another PHP page that accepts that data and stores it in the database. So PHP on both ends of this cycle. Give me the data. Now, oh, here's the current attendance data. Put it back in there again. All that's processed on the server side. Server-side processing is done by either PHP or ASP, or there's a couple of other languages that aren't quite as popular, but those are the two choices that most people see. So what else we got here? Code, HTML, the client still sends it. The client still receives a web page. It looks just like HTML. There's nothing special when we're done. This request, however, is for a PHP page. If the PHP includes a data request, it sends it to the server. We'll learn how to do all of this, believe it or not, this semester. Sounds complicated. It is a little more complicated, but you're used to it. This is easier than iOS, I think. But I've been doing this a little longer, so maybe not. So that PHP page can contain just about anything. What kind of software do we use to get this done? We need browsers. PHP is browser independent because it runs on the server. Browser never sees it. The HTML that the PHP creates, however, could have all the same features and all the same nuances of Internet Explorer, Firefox, Safari that we ran across last semester. So the PHP, the good news is there's only one PHP. And it can send HTML to any of those browsers, but the PHP would have to be specific enough to make sure that it looks the same in all the browsers. How does PHP know what HTML to send? You code it. Well, what if I put in the wrong HTML? Then it sends the wrong HTML. So when your pages don't look right, and they're PHP pages, it could be an HTML problem. Could be a PHP problem, maybe a JavaScript problem. And tracking down the culprit, and this is before we get to the MVC model where we add 3 layers where this stuff comes from. It could be a data problem, it could be a business class problem, it could be a GUI problem, it could be HTML, it could be PHP. Oh my God, yes. And no, there isn't a whole lot easier way to do this PHP stuff. I've heard rumors that got front page stuck. Expression Web can do PHP. I've had no luck. Every time I try to do PHP in Expression Web 4, and as far as I know, they have not updated Expression Web 4. Every time I try to do it, I get more frustrated than anything else. So we need a browser. We need a web server. And a web server that has installed in it the PHP language. It's not a requirement, though every website I've ever looked at provides every web service provides PHP to you. A couple of main choices here. We can go to an Apache server, which is open source, but it is Linux based, which means it's case sensitive. And that's what we'll be using. However, we'll be running it on a Windows platform, so then it goes back to insensitive again. But if you run it, my Apache server, the real one up on Fat Cow, is case sensitive. Be very careful about that. The other alternative is IIS. First time I taught this class, I tried using IIS, but you have to install it. And then you have to install it on your desktop at home. And then you still can't transfer the databases. And it was just more grief for development than it was worth for an educational environment for one semester. Real world, you install it once in your office where you work and you're done. But for us, were you going back and forth with your laptops, your desktops, my lab computers, it was a nightmare compared to how portable apps works. So we'll be using Apache, and we'll be using a portable version of Apache that runs in Windows. So it'll be case insensitive. That's always fun when you then transfer the files to your web server, my Fat Cow page, for instance, and all of a sudden links don't work that did before. I've been kind of harping on you since day one in web programming to make sure your capitalization is consistent with images, with links, with page names, because if they're not, when you put them on a real server, they don't work very well. On the server, we need some kind of a language to process. Often that's PHP, again, because it's open source and available on all servers. You don't have to pay anything. Most servers also probably include an ASP.NET component. That's Visual Basic like. Syntax is pretty easy to figure out. And then there's some older ones, some other ones you can use, Perl, Python, and JSP. I've never used either one of those or any of those. But they're just other server-side languages. And if they're languages, that means they have calculations and if statements and loops and probably database processing and functions, and your job, figure out syntax. We'll also need a database server. So just to review real quick, we got browsers, we got web servers that can process our web service type commands, these kinds of commands. We need the language. So a web server can process many kinds of languages, though typically Apache processes PHP and IIS processes ASP. And then we also need a database server. Remember in my diagram up here, the database server was a different computer, maybe. In our case, it's all going to be in the same stick, if the database isn't too huge. But most web hosting companies have a database server that's completely separate. That database server can run all kinds of languages as well. We'll be using MySQL because it's open source and extremely powerful. Many companies use Oracle. Definitely not open source, but even more powerful. DB2, created by IBM, runs on IBM type servers. And finally, SQL Server is Microsoft's version of a database server. That can also be installed on your local computer, but it's not portable, and that's a real pain. Now, every time you want to take the database home, you have to export it here at school, put it on a stick, take it home, import it on that side, and then when you're ready to come back the other direction, reverse it. Oh my God. Gave up on it. And our stick, our USB stick or drive, lets us learn to use this stuff and make it portable so you can plug it into different machines at home or here or wherever. Doesn't help you with a job interview though, because unless you bring your laptop. Because most of those people will not allow you to bring in a USB stick and plug it in for security reasons. And even if they do let you plug it in, when you start running Apache services, they go, whoa, whoa, whoa. I don't think so. It's safe. Yeah, but. So you might want to ask Sheila to borrow her Surface or something, because it's nice and small and you can show them the stuff. Just bring a laptop in case they want to see it. Questions about any of that? Yeah.
This might be a little off topic, but we're doing all portable MySQL databases.
Yeah.
If you wanted to make it actually stick to a certain machine, is there
a certain server, right? When you say machine.
Can you stick it to just a regular computer?
To a regular desktop?
Yeah.
Yes, you'd have to install the Apache server and the MySQL database engine on that desktop.
Okay.
And that I've done it here. You saw me at the end of last semester. I was using brackets and XAMPP right on the Mac desktop. And I might just go back to that. I don't want to demonstrate all this stuff to you. I might just go back to that to see how it works. But yeah, I have it right here. The downside is I now cannot extract that database easily and take it someplace else, but that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I was
You don't
thinking
want to.
for the purpose of like wrapping it into like a C# app or something, and then something that you would run on a local machine. How would you?
You can run it on a local machine, but to distribute it to multiple users, you've got to get the multiple users to install your database software and probably want to install XAMPP as well. And then when they run your program, you have to tell them they have to launch XAMPP, launch Apache, launch MySQL. It's a little easier on a website because all that stuff's already running. Because when I launch my attendance program, I don't have to tell my web server to start PHP, to start MySQL. I just have to put the commands in that says I need that database.
Okay.
So yes, but.
Could you do it on a? You could do that on a local server though, like in an environment that's.
You could, if you're virtualizing it, put it on a local server. The other thing you can do with XAMPP and MySQL is run them as a service. And if you set them up as a service, you can tell Windows to run them right away. So as soon as you launch Windows, then XAMPP is running, MySQL is running. Even when you don't need it, it's running. So if your computer, your desktop that you're installing is not powerful enough, I don't think those services are huge, but they do. It's another chunk of memory that's constantly being eaten up. Okay. So this is the kind of picture that you have to keep in your mind. We'll probably refer back to it a couple more times as we go. Okay. This comes in, we get the page. If the page needs it, we get data. We use the data to create an HTML page that gets sent and displayed by the browser. No PHP in this. This is a pure HTML page when it comes back. And whether you're using IIS, PHP, ASP, doesn't matter. What comes out is HTML with data embedded inside it. And that's where things get cool. Complicated, but cool. PHP websites are made up of all the stuff that we've already seen. First of all, they're made up of PHP pages. Any page that has PHP in it must be labeled .php. Its extension must be .php. If you label it .html, you'll get either a syntax error when the page loads, or you'll get the PHP displaying on the page, or you'll get an error, or it'll just ignore it. But the PHP never processes. The PHP actually gets sent as if it was HTML. HTML pages can also be included, but Murak says if you're building a site that's got PHP pages, just label them all PHP. Even if they don't have PHP in them, doesn't matter. That way you don't have to worry about, should I call it HTML, PHP, all the above. Once we get to the MVC model, they're all PHP pages anyways. CSS files can be linked in, JavaScript files get linked in, PHP include files. That's how we bring in all of our business logic. We put it into an include file so that we can isolate them. Images, video, all the stuff that you've used is still available. We're not taking any of that away. We're just now giving you the opportunity to link it to a database. And not only that, but I also use it to create my syllabi. Every syllabus I have includes the exact same grading scale, the exact same core abilities, the exact same integrity policy, course expectations, classroom environment, recorded lectures policy, and special needs. Has the exact same footer, has the exact same header. Every single syllabus. So instead of copying it from place to place to place, and then of course every now and then Midstate changes their policies, and I'd have to change it in 20 different syllabi, I have one copy, and I include into every one of my syllabi an external file that has the, forgotten all the stuff, academic integrity policy in it. So this is actually a separate file with the HTML to make this H1, with the CSS to make it maroon, with the CSS to make that highlighted in this blue, etc., and all the text. The PHP actually creates it. You can create any HTML using PHP, which gives you the ability to have, almost like Volcker tools, components that you can reuse over and over and over again. And also distribute that, break it apart, so that if the academic integrity policy changes, I change it in one place and every one of my syllabi automatically updates. PHP files are still pure text. It's just code. Curly brackets, semicolons, all that stuff, yes, but still text. All the code we wrote in Swift was text that we run through a compiler. Same kind of stuff happens here. It can be developed with any text editor, Notepad, Notepad++, brackets, any text editor. We can build PHP in. If you get a smart one like Notepad++ or brackets, it'll syntax highlight and it'll probably help you with a few IntelliSense type stuff. Not what it's called in the other languages, but you get the idea. If you wish, as I mentioned early on, you can try some integrated development environments for PHP, but I haven't found one that I've been real happy with yet. The student who figured out how to use Eclipse wrote me up some notes. But boy, I tell you, sometimes he spent more time fighting with Eclipse than he did solving PHP problems. The advantages, some of them include debuggers. But unfortunately, that poor student who tried it, I think it was Jaron, works over with you, doesn't he, Dustin? Is Jaron over there? Yeah, I think he tried it, and he didn't like the debugger. That was the main reason for using it. Because today, our text editors have their own syntax highlighting. We don't gain much there. But it was debugging is what that was supposed to help with, and it didn't help a whole lot. Right, we know about XAMPP. It allows us to simulate the servers, portable. We know how to install it. Now here's the next kicker. All right, now hopefully, I should apologize to Neil. I'm not sure you were in the room when I mentioned that on OneDrive, there is in the web data management folder a Unit 1 demo folder, and inside there are 2 demos. We want the Unit 1 demo. The downside to using a server, even a portable server, is that the files have to be located in the correct location. Otherwise, the server can't find it. With XAMPP, these files that you're manipulating must be located in the htdocs folder. So I'm going to open up my flash drive. I don't have one open already. What's that? Please. Thank you. What I like to do is once I found my htdocs folder, I like to make a shortcut to it. Now I have 2 shortcuts on this drive because it used to be turned into an F drive in my home computer. It doesn't do that anymore. But I make a shortcut to it here so I don't have to go navigating to it all the time and try to remember. It's not real hard to find. It's in your XAMPP folder. If you open your XAMPP folder, part of what was created when you installed XAMPP is an htdocs folder. That is where you must put any project that you want to work on. It must be in there, otherwise it will not execute the PHP because it's not really on the server. This is htdocs is on the server. That's the way to look at it. So inside of there, I want to drag my Unit 1 demo. Do I already have one in here? No. So I can just drag it in there. And now it's on the server, and I can tell the server to run. Now in this case, it's got some funky spacing. Once I get into putting stuff on servers, particularly my main server, I don't like spaces in the names. I'm getting to the point where I don't even capitalize stuff. Notice all these folder names? As long as it's capitalized correctly, you're okay. But with the spaces here, that can get a little dicey. It'll work okay here portable, but you throw it onto a live server, particularly a Linux server, and those spaces will cause you trouble. My recommendation is pull them. So I'm just going to edit this here. And I'm going to go to camel case and just say unit 1 demo. And now I'm going to look inside there. All that's in there is an index PHP file. What does it do? I don't remember. So let's go look. I'm going to go to, I have not, thought I started portable apps, I guess not. So back to my E drive, should have launched portable apps. Bring up Notepad++. Oh, let's do all that later. I get a feeling I'm going to run out of real estate here real soon. Okay, then I can go back here to my htdocs folder, and here's my unit 1 demo folder with the index PHP file. Drag that in there and see what's there. Notice there's one little PHP command in there. So if you wish, you can open it as well. Otherwise, when you launch this page, it will say unit 1 demo. Notice it's got a head tag with meta tags, with a title tag. Still uses all the same HTML stuff, but it has PHP embedded inside it. You can recognize PHP because it starts with a PHP tag and it ends with an end tag. We'll learn about those in Unit 2 very, very quickly, but here's your intro. That's how you embed PHP into HTML. You do the same kind of thing. If they're external files, you just wrap those around the whole blooming file, and it's a PHP file. So I'm going to change the message and say, hope you're having a good first day. Save it. Now your first instinct, because you're used to double clicking on HTML files to immediately send them to a browser, is to double click on this, but browsers do not recognize PHP files. What often happens on my devices is when I double click that, it starts launching Expression Web. Now what you can do, and I can try it here, is say send this to or open with, there we go, open with. No, I don't want to go to the app. And I'm in Windows 8, so this is going to be painful, I think. Can I get to Notepad++? There it is. And it won't let me do it because it's installed there. And if you can do the open with and try to set that so that it permanently opens your PHP files in Notepad++. If you can make that happen, it makes life a little easier. Double click a PHP file. It doesn't run it in a browser. But if you double click it, instead of trying to open Expression Web, which can be time consuming because it's a big Microsoft product that takes 2 minutes to load, and then it finally shows you your page, which is, put it in Notepad if you can figure it out. In my office, I've got it figured out. But here it's not going to let me do it. Okay, so if I want to run this, what do? You have to request access to the server. So I'm going to open my browser. And for those of you that are Chrome lovers, it might be a little different. What I'm going to show you here might be a little different in Chrome. What I normally do is simply in the address bar type localhost. If you type localhost and Apache is running, you will get address 127.0.0.1, which is the loopback address. Basically says, I want this web page to come back from me. This request, send it back to me. Goes out to the web and immediately comes back and your Apache server then receives the request. And in this case, what I'm asking for, if you just do localhost, is you will get a list of the folders that are in your htdocs folder. Now, if you still have some of that XAMPP junk left in there, you might want to get rid of it. Remember when you first installed XAMPP, it put some stuff in your htdocs. You might want to get rid of those. You might want to copy the phpMyAdmin folder from, I think it's just outside of htdocs, and copy it in there. In the lab that I had you do, that was part of the lab. This isn't necessary. It just allows you to quickly access your database using phpMyAdmin, which is what most servers provide to you. But here's all my projects that I have on here. And I want to do the Unit 1 demo. There it is. I can click it, and because the main file inside there is called index, or default, even though it has a PHP on the end, it still automatically launches it. So remember with your websites, if you typed in just the folder name into the browser, it would automatically launch. The index file is the default file for a folder. I can up here, if I know the name, I can say localhost / unit 1 demo. And then I don't have to click on it. If you know where you're going, you can put the address up there. If it's not named index, I can put another slash and say voker.php, and it will launch that PHP file. But by simply entering unit 1 demo, it'll find the index file and automatically launch it. And there we are, and there's my message. There is no shortcut around that. Unlike HTML files, you must access localhost first to get that page. Harold?
Can you bookmark localhost?
You may bookmark them. And you'll be bookmarking localhost demo 1. So yes, you can bookmark them. And then drag them down here to your bar as you're working on that homework assignment, so whenever you want to test it again. And I can refresh this page as well. Once it's launched, I can use all my normal tools. So if I come in here and modify my file, hopefully you're having a good second day just as a demo, save it, come back here, refresh. That still works. What happened when I refreshed is it went back to the server, said I need the index.php page again. Where do I need it? Where do I get it from? Localhost brings it back, updates it. But it's that initial launch that causes beginning students in this class a little grief till you get used to it. You can't just double click the HTML file. Let's look at the source code of this. Remember my PHP tag, and then there was a document write line, I forget what print line, echo, sorry. Print line's the alternative. And the echo command, that's the syntax that we still have to learn. Remember this should show up here, right? Because it's part of my page source. No. What the echo command does is it echoes this text into the HTML. So the HTML itself doesn't have that. Most of the time, I don't even look at the source anymore, unless, this is a great debugging tool, by the way, because you can look at the source and go, where did that come from? Why is that in my HTML? Because you also have to learn in this class to picture what you expect the PHP to create. Now in this case, I've created a page with an H1, and this is an end body, and if I wanted to, I could come over here and put our trusty dusty, I think it's a /n, inside my tag here. Save it, close this, and refresh this page. Shouldn't change anything. But if I go back and view the page source, now my body tag's back down again. Does that matter? Not at all. Unless you're trying to read this to debug what the heck's going on and all your HTML's all squished, especially if you're building tables. Am I missing an end tag someplace? Hard to tell if they aren't formatted right. Another thing that gets a little confusing is this \n that I added. Notice it didn't start a new line after this text on my web page. It added a carriage return into my HTML. It's like typing a carriage return into Notepad++ to format my HTML in case I happen to look at it. Ew. Now, if I do look at this HTML again, it's still open over here. Yeah, that looks better. My body tag all nice and lined up because initially it was up here. If I were to validate this, would it validate? Maybe, but this thing here, what's it in? What is that? Is it an H1? Is it a paragraph? Is it a bulleted list? What is that? If you want to validate your pages to make sure that the HTML your PHP is generating is valid, you have to come in here, highlight this, paste it into a separate text document, and run that through the validator. Ew. You can't validate a PHP page because the validator chokes on it. There may be a way to tell it to ignore the PHP, but that doesn't solve your problem if the PHP is generating HTML. So maybe to make this a little bit more appropriate, I should go in here and say, you know what, you're a paragraph, so now I'm adding, let's just make it an H2. Could have made it a paragraph. Now again, remember the \n does not modify the results of my HTML. It's like adding 6 carriage returns inside your Notepad++. What does that do to your results? Nothing. It formats my HTML itself, but not the page. So the only thing that should be different now is that this is going to show up a little bit bigger. Need a what? Oh, thank you. Anything you can do with HTML, you can create using PHP. Pardon me? \n?
Yeah.
Doesn't do anything here.
Right.
It moves the body tag down to the next line. Otherwise, it's up here because it says add the H2, end H2 to the HTML. And then keep plugging along. Okay, so the body tag ended up here. Does it matter that it's down there? Only if you're debugging because your website isn't working. Once my website starts working and I'm convinced that I can even validate it because the validator doesn't care if it's all nice and formatted, right? That was just me. And in this class, I'm not going to be looking at your HTML that is created by PHP and say, is it indented properly? It's just not worth it. You could spend hours just trying to get your HTML created by PHP to be on the right lines, indented properly. No. If I'm concerned, I might validate it. But again, to validate this, you have to highlight this, paste it into a separate text document, save it, and then run it through the validator. Now this message that I'm displaying, obviously I can change it, and here the PHP adds absolutely nothing, right? Because it's still fixed. Well, I could read that from a text file. I could add database commands, say, go get me the line of the first welcoming message, or generate a random number using PHP. Go to the database, read down the random number of files, grab that greeting, and stick it in here. And every time I launch this page, I get a different greeting. Random numbers can be put in here. JavaScript can do the same thing, except the JavaScript can't pull from the database. There are additions to jQuery now where jQuery can go back to the server, execute a PHP page, accept the data that the PHP generates. The JavaScript is doing this now, and then plug it into a page so you don't have to reload an entire page. I'm still trying to get my head around that stuff. I used it in our last project, but man, that makes figuring out what the heck's going on even more complicated because now pieces of the page are being dynamically generated from the server by the jQuery. All kinds of possibilities here. It's not something we're going to take a look at. This is still fixed. But imagine it coming from the database. I believe that in my htdocs folder, I had some complicated stuff, so we'll take a quick look at that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. And here's my attendance program. Let me show you the index page. Notice the first tag is PHP, and the last tag is PHP. Where's all my headers and all the rest of that stuff? Not in here. This is a 3-tiered model, so that it does not know what it's going to display. Notice all these require statements. Those bring in model files, business class files. And then down here, what's my current action? What did the user expect me to do? Do they want the daily attendance? Do they want the daily attendance save? What do they want? If it's daily attendance, then go do some database stuff. And notice every one of these, this is a database command, this one's a database command, here's a database command, and if we read that, you can kind of figure out what's going on. Get the list of semesters. Remember the combo box that had the semesters in it? This gets me the list. Get the classes that meet on the current day. How does that function work? Oh, we can go look. But notice the encapsulation. I don't care. It works. And then get the people who are in that, in the current selection. And it just goes on and it just loops back into this. The index page in an MVC model, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. But if I tell it to you now and tell it to you again later, it might make a little more sense. The index page morphs into every single page that you need. There's only one page on this site that the user ever directly interacts with, and it's the index page. And if the index page, if the current and the action changes, every time you hit it, there's a different action variable. If the action variable is daily attendance, we do this stuff and we include the daily attendance view, the GUI. If we're saving, then we do something else. Now this is an old version because it doesn't do anything but save and get daily attendance. It now has new features that allow me to import files and modify students and do all that kind of stuff. The latest edition of this is much bigger. In our systems project, the number of cases, the number of actions that we are going to handle is going to be huge. Maybe hundreds of actions, and so there'll be a case for every one of those 100 actions. It gets so complicated, I actually split the case statement apart, the switch statement apart. So I have some cases over there, and some cases over here, and some cases over there. Just because this index page, 100 cases, gets too hard to navigate. No HTML. But there are lots and lots of views, business models, some JavaScript files, images, CSS, and this is my calendar support files. All of this will be available to you. And considering how bright this group is, you're going to do some pretty amazing things. But remember, index.php is the main page. The MVC model doesn't come back to us, doesn't come back to haunt us again until the third unit. So our PHP apps have to be in the htdocs folder. That's another thing that's a little confusing. It's another reason we use portable apps. Because if you didn't do that, if you had the hardwired Apache server on your desktop, when you leave, you got to remember to grab the files because they're in htdocs so that you can use them at home. And the other thing that htdocs does is it forces us to use localhost with no spaces, localhost to launch that page. There is a way to change where the localhost folder is. Knock yourself out. It causes me more grief than it's worth. You can create subfolders. As you can see here in my htdocs, I have folders for every single project. And within those projects, I can have subfolders. So here's books read. Notice the structure of this is very, very similar. The structure of an htdocs or a MVC model website looks pretty much like this all the time. But again, how you organize it, it's really up to you. That's just the organizational system that I use. And I learned MVC, by the way, from Murak, the book that you have. That's where I learned it. Can create subfolders. Okay, where do I put my SQL databases? How do I drag them in? You don't. XAMPP also includes a MySQL folder, but inside the MySQL folder is a data folder, and inside the data folder is a bunch of databases. Notice here's mine from before, Henry Books and Premier Product. Can I just pick up these and copy them? No. Even if they exist on the other end, you can't pick them up and copy them because the structure is not necessarily the same. The number of rows in the database might be changed. If they don't change, then why are you copying them? So no, you can't just pick those up and copy them. They are created using MySQL binary storage somehow. And the other part is, how do you get at them? There is a database of databases here someplace. Forget where it is. It's one of these. It's not labs, not our DVDs, performance maybe. Somewhere in there, there's a database of databases that keeps track, might be out here, that keeps track of which databases are in this data, which databases are in our database server. So no, you can't just pick them up and copy them. That's where they're stored. And you only have access to this MySQL server if you turn it on in XAMPP. And now I don't know if I tried to launch my attendance program here, whether it would work. Because I don't know if the database is installed here. It might be. Go back to localhost. What do you mean not found? Somehow got wrapped in there. That was our project from last semester. Okay. And books read, maybe that's in there. Yep. This is a table, right? With borders on. You can see them, it's a table. Every row is in a loop. This table is probably created with about 9-10 lines of code. Because like anything else, it just pulls database records out of an array and adds them to the tables and then sends the table as HTML. This is pure HTML. Sends that table to the web, to the browser to display it. But in order for this to work, MySQL has to be turned on. So in this class, before you do much of anything else, you stick in your USB drive, you launch portable apps, you launch Apache, you launch MySQL, and then you get to work. Now early on, we won't be using any databases, but they come in here pretty quick. If you don't need the database server for our first 3 or 4 assignments, you don't need to start MySQL, because your PHP is what you're focusing on there. But once we get to the database component, MySQL needs to be running. Learned how to test it, going to localhost. If you just type localhost, you'll get a list of all the folders in your localhost directory. That's a quick way, or you can do what Harold said, is then once you've done that, then bookmark the page you're on, put it on your quick launch bar or whatever so you can quickly punch it to get it to run. This delete tip is with all those XAMPP files that were put in there by default when you installed XAMPP. Make sure you pull that junk out. When you start, your htdocs folder should be pretty empty. Maybe copy the PHP myadmin files in there. Here's another tip. I don't know if it's still in mine. Under run, I used to have a local host here. There it is, local host. But by the time excuse me, by the time I click on that, I could go to the browser, type in localhost, press enter. You can put it in your run dialog. It's probably already there if you have my Notepad++ updates. If you want to launch a page that is not the index page, this is pretty rare. We get to the MVC model, that's the only page we ever launch. If you want to launch a page that is not MVC, that is not the index page, remember that one launches automatically. and you simply put localhost / folder name / folder name / folder name / page name.php, and it will launch that page. So that's your overview. The key part of today is a little bit of demos and see how complex some of this stuff can get. But the key part today is we're now in client-server mode. The client still gets HTML. The web page can be dynamically created using PHP, and that's what we're going to learn how to do. And then once we get the database component, we'll learn how, using PHP, to pull the data out of the database, translate it into HTML so it displays like my books list does over here. That's where we're going. But this big picture here is a good one to keep handy, and I'll have it handy. It's on my website, and just go back and forth to remember that this is the chain of events that are happening. And this part of it can get more and more complex as we go. That's all I have for today. Next time we'll jump right into Unit 2, which starts our PHP sequential processing. So if you want to get a jump start, you can kind of read that over. These notes also point you to pages in the book. Looks like for the most part we're in the late 40s to the upper mid 60s with a few diversions. You can read that stuff over if you want to prep for it. Otherwise, I'll guide you through it as we go. That's all for today. Take a half-hour break before the next class starts.